Hello and welcome to Chapter 2, Introduction to Visual Basic. I wanted to give you a general idea of some things that you are working with. We are going to learn about the forms, we're going to learn about labels, we're going to learn about buttons, we're going to learn about the three-letter extension behind all of those items, or naming convention that's in relation to those items, their names, and the difference between a name and the text field, and different properties like that. So here we go. Now, you'll notice that it says Unit 1. This is actual Chapter 2. There were some naming issues that I have not yet solved. All right, the very first thing is we're going to talk about the GUI as a graphical user interface. Obviously, you can read right there, and the idea is this is the basic interface that you're using with Visual Basic. You'll notice, like, create your new project, and it goes through different items. You can actually see Video 2 and Video 1, which talk about how to open up the project and how to create the Hello World project kind of in a step-by-step fashion to give you an idea of what you're looking at. Additionally, let's continue. And this is Visual Basic is very event-driven, So when it talks about an event, usually a button click or something along those lines based on an object, and we'll get more to the vocabulary as we go along. All right, this is the Visual Basic. Now, this is the 2010 IDE. This is what we just looked at. You have your general menu bar, you have your toolbar up here. Once again, this is the actual program itself. Same sort of idea. We'll get plenty used to this as we go through. As we create a new project, let me go ahead and create a new project here. So we're just going to do new project. And I'm going to choose Windows Form Apps. I'm just going to call it Windows App 1 for now. See Video 1 of how to properly create a new project. It goes into that process. You'll notice on our PDF document, it usually comes up. Here's our toolbox right here. Here's our form with the objects, and here's a form one over here. Whatever object I have clicked over here, the properties here display. So there's a synergy between the object I have clicked here and what displays in the property. Additionally, if I have multiple objects in my form, I can hit this down drop arrow right here, and it'll display all the different objects that are in my form. This is also where the idea of the naming convention, so I can easier tell what's going on. So here's my form, and here's my, once again, I've only got one object, so here's my down drop arrow that I was talking about there. All right, let's continue. This gives us an idea of our navigator, which is our menu at the very top. Easy to navigate, easy to work with. You'll get more used to that as we go along. Then we have our form, and our form is the object that contains everything. It's where we put our text boxes, labels, buttons, everything that we need in order to work with it. And the way this looks, this is our form right here, and we're going to work more with that as we go along. Now, the very first thing is a label control. The label control, its name is going to be LBL. Text is the text displayed in the label. Font defines the font name, and these are all properties right here. And the way I add my label, once again, I could see Video 2 that lets me add more labels, but the way it shows me how to add more labels, what I can do, or a label, sorry, is I can click on this. Notice I selected the label control. I can left click and hold. I draw my label right here. The text is what's contained in the label. So if I come down here, notice I've clicked on label 1. It's label 1. Here's my text. I can say this is what displays. And you'll notice as I change the text of my label, it is displayed up there. And then as I scroll up right here, once again I still have my label displayed. And I come on here and my name, I'm just going to call this LBL sample, as this is my sample label that I'm adding. Normally when you name a label or name an object, you have to, it is wise, number one, to have the three-letter extension, in our case the LBL. It is also wise to go ahead and make sure that its name is named something that's representational of what it contains. So if it's a label meant to tell you to input a name, you might call it LBL name input or something along those lines. So when I'm looking at a list, I can easily tell what it's for by looking at the name, because if I just call it LBLA, LBLB, LBLC, when I come back to it, I'll have no idea what it's meant for. And you do want to know what it's meant for later on. So here's my label. The next control is a menu strip. I'm not even going to get into it understand the text goes into how to create a menu. You want to know how to create a menu. The three-letter extension for the name is MNU. The only issue is that sometimes the menus simply stop working. So if an individual starts using a menu and then it stops working, they have to end up making a text box. Excuse me, they have to end up making a button anyway. So for a lot of these projects, you want to go ahead and start using a button, or when you create it, have a simple menu so you understand how to use it, and then use a button, because the button doesn't usually stop working, whereas a menu sometimes gets unreliable and corrupt. I've never been sure why, but just as a heads up. Now we have what's called program code, and the code is what's behind different objects that are added to the form. For instance, if I have a label that says this is what's displayed, and I want to create a button, so I'm going to go over here to my buttons, and I'm going to draw my button. The name, once again, I have the button selected. I'm going to go over to the name. I'm going to call that BTN name change. And that'll come into play a little bit later on. And I'm going to go down to the actual text, which is down here. And I'm going to call it this text right here. I'm going to say push to change. Oops. Yeah, I'm going to change name. Okay. And what that does is when I push enter, notice it says push to change name. It's going to provide some sort of code behind it. The way I can get to the code or the click event procedure is double clicking on the object itself, in our case the button. You'll notice it has BTN name change because I changed the name before I went to the code. In some of the older versions of Visual Basic, if you change the name after you go to the code, then the code and the name are separate. So you've just got some code floating around associated with an object that doesn't exist anymore, so you don't want to do that. I believe they have it solved in the Visual Studio 2010 version, but it's always better safe than sorry. So anyway, I have that item there, so let's continue to talk about. So this is where I'm at my program code, like I was talking about, of the object, that button that I've created. Now what I can do is, this is our click event procedure. Procedure is a block of code written to perform a specific task. Notice it was a click event procedure associated with that particular object, which was our button, called BTN name change, I believe, and I double clicked on it in order to make it change. All right, so they're talking about the code window here, and this is what we just talked about. And if you have a certain object right here, you can choose the different property and what it does. So in our particular case, if I wanted to create an exit on the tool strip or an end, I could do application, because there's a method, which is a type of program associated with the form that has all the different options for it. One option is exit. I could also simply type the reserved word end, E-N-D, and it would just stop, right? And it have the same basic effect. And this is using the application class with the application.exit. We don't use that very much, but you should be aware of its existence. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is assignment statements. And assignment statements, the way they work is me, the form, the name of the object. So in our case, I believe it was LBL name change, and the property you want to change. So if you want the property to change to a different value, you then put dot property, so in our case it'll be text, and then equals whatever you want it to be. So for instance, let me pull up my code right here. Now the object that I wanted to change is, I'm going to click on this so I know, it's called LBL sample. There we go. And but BTN name change is the name of the button. So what we're going to do is, we're going to do me dot, and as soon as I do that, it has all the different things that it can work with. In our case, ours was L. Notice it lists the labels. It has a lot of other items here, but what we're concerned with is the object we made, which is LBL sample, right? Me.LBL sample dot, and the property we're going to access is text. So as soon as we hit dot, it's pulling up all the properties of that particular object and or methods, one of which is the text. So I can either click on text or continue to type it, right? So text, and then equals, and I'm just going to type on there, Mr. Sebastian. Now you'll notice it's in quotes. When I put it in quotes, Sebastian. When I put it in quotes, I make it what's known as a string literal, so it's going to be assigned to it. So what it does is accesses the form, me, right? Then LBL sample, so the object called LBL sample. Then it accesses the property called text and then makes the assignment Mr. Sebastian. The way this looks as we run, and since this is associated with the button name change, it's associated with this button right here. So if I run it, push a little run button right here, I hit push to change name, it accesses this and then puts Mr. Sebastian. It accesses the item called LBL change or LBL sample and then puts in Mr. Sebastian. Now each time I'm pushing this, it's actually putting a new Mr. Sebastian in there. The only deal is it writes over the old value, so it replaces that, so you can't really see the difference. So I can end it by closing this, or if I had an end button, I could end it that way too. So let me continue here. Radio buttons, which we're not going to use a lot of, but they start with RAD. The name is RAD followed by what the radio button does. Text is the text next to the button. The same text property as the rest. Check determines if it's true or false. Group box, GRP. If I have a group of radio buttons, I can actually put them inside of that. The way this looks is, it's long since I use a group box. There's my group box. So if I choose a group box and I put it like that, it'll actually say group box. And if I have my radio button, I can actually left click on that and then draw my radio buttons inside my group box. So now those radio buttons are related, and then I could code them appropriately. For what we need, we don't really need those. If I want to get rid of it, I just click on it, delete, it goes away. And then, since all those are grouped, it went away at one time. Alright, so we did the group box. Comments. Now, interesting thing about comments is it lets you know what's going on. So for instance, I push the apostrophe so it knows, hey, don't run this code. That's why it's in green. This assigns a value to LBL sample. And it just gives you an idea of what you're doing in the code. For this, it's pretty simple, but later on, as your code gets more and more complex, it gets more and more difficult to figure out what the heck you were doing when you go back to it. So you need to make sure you have comments, and you want to start that habit now. You lose points for that. You just be aware, no comments, you're going to lose. That's on a 10-point scale. You're automatically going to lose 2 points. You want to make sure that you have comments. Right now, it seems like a educational endeavor because the teacher told me to, but later on it actually comes into play. So you want to have that habit in play, as well as the naming conventions. All right, arithmetic operators, exponential, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction, just like you think it's supposed to be. Now the way it looks is, for instance, if I do 5 exponent 5, that's 5 to the 5th power. And if I do 5 times 5, that's 5 times 5. So in each one of these, the only difference is an assignment would look like this. me.lbl, if that's where I was going to put it, lbl sample dot text equals that. So I'm putting the results of this in this. When we get to variable usage, you can do some more with it, but you'll notice that I'm not making this equal something like I would in mathematics. I'm making it equal something in reverse, so I'm actually doing the calculation, and then I'm assigning the results of the calculation somewhere. So that's the way it kind of works in code, so you need to kind of back away from that mathematically. We did our, went back, sorry. So in our case, and it does order of operations, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, or PEMDAS, or whatever values you want, but it does this in that particular order of operations, paralleling mathematics. And you can change the order of operations using parentheses, just like you have done mathematically before. Shouldn't be, well, I'm hoping that's not too difficult. Once again, if you have questions where this is concerned, you can post them on the available board in your resources for this particular chapter. You can also talk to the long-term sub, or, like I said, put it on the board and I'll answer questions if necessary. And the next thing, we've already done the button control, already took care of that. And there's some coding conventions we'll get into later. All right, well, if you have any questions, make sure to ask your sub, or post it to your resources, specifically the discussion about this particular chapter. Thank you for your time.